Grace Bennett was 62 years old, and she'd heard every joke there was about her age. The reading glasses perched on her nose, the silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, the slight stoop in her shoulders that came from decades of carrying heavy equipment. To the young soldiers at Fort Benning, Georgia, she looked like someone's grandmother, not a marksmanship instructor. Grace stood at the shooting range on a humid August morning, clipboard in hand, watching a group of infantry soldiers practice with their rifles. She'd been a civilian contractor here for 5 years, teaching advanced marksmanship to soldiers headed for specialized units. Most of them tolerated her, some respected her, a few treated her like she was invisible. And then there was Staff Sergeant Derek Cole. "Morning, ma'am," Cole said as he approached, his tone just barely respectful enough to avoid being called out. He was 28, built like a linebacker with a confident swagger that bordered on arrogance. "Good morning, Sergeant Cole. Did you review the materials I sent about wind reading?" "Looked at them," Cole said with a shrug. "Pretty basic stuff. I've been shooting since I was 8. My father taught me everything about rifles." Grace had heard this before. Young soldiers, especially men, who assumed that because they'd been hunting with their fathers or shooting recreationally for years, they didn't need instruction from a woman who looked like she should be baking cookies instead of teaching marksmanship. "Good," Grace said evenly. "Then today's exercises should be straightforward for you." She gathered the group of 12 soldiers and began the day's instruction. They were working on long-range precision shooting, learning to account for wind, elevation, temperature, and other factors that affected bullet trajectory. Grace explained each concept clearly, using diagrams and examples. Most of the soldiers listened attentively. Cole spent half the time on his phone. "Sergeant Cole," Grace said, "is there something more important than this instruction?" Cole looked up, not bothering to hide his phone. "Just checking messages, ma'am. Like I said, this is pretty basic for me." "Then perhaps you'd like to demonstrate for the class." Cole smiled, happy to. He took position at the 1,000-yard range, settling behind a rifle with practiced ease. Grace had to admit his form was good. He'd clearly had training. "Wind is coming from the east at approximately 8 miles per hour, Grace said. "Target is at 1,000 yards. Account for wind drift and take your shot when ready." Cole spent maybe 30 seconds setting up, then fired. The bullet hit the target, but 4 inches left of center. "Not bad," Cole said. "Little bit of adjustment needed." "You didn't account properly for wind drift," Grace said. "At this distance, with these conditions, you need to compensate more. Try again." Cole's second shot was closer, but still off-center. His third was about the same. "See," Cole said, standing up. "Just needed to warm up. I got the concept." "You got closer to the target," Grace said. "But in a combat situation, closer isn't good enough. You need precision." "With respect, ma'am," Cole said, and his tone suggested no respect at all. "I've been in combat. I've made shots under pressure. I know the difference between range practice and the real thing." "I'm sure you do," Grace said calmly, "but that doesn't mean you can't improve." Cole's expression suggested he disagreed, but he didn't argue further. The other soldiers took their turns, with Grace providing individual coaching and correction. At lunch, Grace sat alone in the instructor's break room, eating the sandwich she'd brought from home. Through the window, she could see Cole talking with some of the other soldiers. They were laughing, and Grace was fairly certain she was the subject of their humor. She'd learned not to let it bother her, or at least not to show that it bothered her. The door opened, and Mark Foster, another civilian instructor, walked in. Mark was in his 50s, a former Army Ranger who specialized in tactical training. "How's the morning group?" Mark asked. "Same as always. Some eager to learn, some think they already know everything." "Let me guess, Cole." Grace smiled slightly. "Am I that predictable?" "He's been like that with everyone, but he's especially dismissive of you, I've noticed. He's young and confident. He'll either learn humility or he won't. Either way, I do my job." Mark sat down across from her. "Grace, you've been doing this job for 5 years, and you've trained some of the best snipers in the military. Why do you let people like Cole disrespect you?" "What would you have me do? Pull rank I don't have any more. Demand respect I haven't earned in their eyes." "You've earned it 100 times over. They just don't know it." "And I prefer it that way," Grace said quietly. Mark shook his head. I know you like your privacy, but sometimes I think you should tell them who you really are, show them your records, let them see. No, Grace said firmly. I'm not that person anymore, I'm just an instructor now. What Mark knew, and what the soldiers didn't, was that Grace Bennett had been one of the most decorated snipers in U.S. military history. She'd served for 26 years, including 4 combat deployments. She had over 200 confirmed kills and had trained dozens of elite snipers. But she'd retired 10 years ago and had carefully buried that past. When she'd applied for the civilian instructor position, she'd used only her basic qualifications, not her full record. She didn't want to be Grace Bennett, legendary sniper. She just wanted to be Grace, a quiet instructor doing honest work. The afternoon session was more of the same. Grace taught, Cole barely paid attention, and the rest of the soldiers fell somewhere in between. At the end of the day, the base commander's office sent out a notice. There would be a marksmanship competition in 2 weeks. All ranges would be represented. The winner would receive recognition and a bonus. Cole was immediately interested. I'm definitely entering, he announced to the group. Should be easy money. One of the other soldiers, Private Chen, asked, Will you be entering, Ms. Bennett? Grace looked up from her notes. I'm an instructor, not a competitor. But you must be good if you're teaching us, Chen pressed. I know enough to teach, Grace said neutrally. Cole laughed. Come on, Chen. No offense to Ms. Bennett, but this competition is for real shooters, combat veterans, people who can handle pressure. I'm sure Ms. Bennett could, Chen started. Could what, compete with soldiers in their prime? Cole shook his head. Look, I'm sure she's a fine teacher for the basics, but actual shooting, that's different. Grace said nothing. She'd learned long ago that arguing with men like Cole was pointless. They only believed what they wanted to believe. That evening, Grace drove home to her small house on the outskirts of Columbus, Georgia. It was quiet and neat, with a small garden she tended on weekends. She lived alone. Her husband had died 8 years ago, and her 2 children lived out of state with families of their own. Inside, she made a simple dinner and sat in her living room, looking at the photographs on the mantel. There was one of her in uniform, decades younger, standing with her sniper team. Another of her receiving a medal from a general. A third of her at the sniper school, the first woman to complete the course. Those photos were the only evidence of who she'd been. She kept them here in private, where they reminded her of her past without defining her present. Grace's phone rang. It was her daughter, Michelle, calling from Oregon. Hi, Mom, how was work? Same as always, teaching soldiers who think they know everything. Michelle laughed. Sounds familiar, are they at least respectful? Most of them, there's always 1 or 2 who aren't. You should tell them about your record, shut them up real fast. That's not who I am anymore, honey. You're still the same person who earned all those medals, Mom. You can't just erase that. I'm not erasing it, I'm just moving forward. After the call, Grace sat in silence, thinking about what Michelle had said. Was she erasing her past, or was she simply choosing not to live in it? She didn't have an answer. The next morning at the range, Cole was even more cocky than usual. Word had spread that he'd entered the marksmanship competition, and he was holding court with other soldiers about how he planned to win. It's all about staying calm under pressure, Cole was saying. That's what separates the good shooters from the great ones. I've made shots in combat that would make your head spin. Grace listened while setting up the morning's equipment. Cole had been in combat, she knew from his file. 1 deployment to Afghanistan, mostly convoy security. Respectable service, but nothing extraordinary. Ms. Bennett, Cole called out, you ever been in combat? The question was clearly meant to embarrass her. Everyone assumed she hadn't. Grace turned to face him. I've been in situations where marksmanship mattered, yes. But actual combat, taking fire, returning fire, lives on the line. Grace could have told him the truth, could have described missions that would make his single deployment look like a training exercise, but she didn't. I've served, she said simply. Cole smirked, taking her non-answer as confirmation that she hadn't seen real action. Thought so. No offense, but there's a difference between teaching at a range and actually being in the fight. You're absolutely right, Grace said. There is a difference. Cole nodded, satisfied that he'd made his point. What he didn't know was that Grace agreed with him completely. There was a difference between teaching and fighting. She'd done both, and the fighting had been the easy part. Over the next week, Cole's disrespect grew more blatant. He questioned Grace's instructions in front of other soldiers. He made jokes about her age and gender. He openly dismissed her corrections. Grace maintained her composure, but she could see the effect it was having on the other soldiers. Some of them were starting to doubt her competence. Others were uncomfortable with Cole's behavior, but didn't speak up. "Ma'am," Private Chen said during a break, "is it true you never served in combat?" Grace looked at the young soldier. "Why do you ask?" "Sergeant Cole said you were probably just a desk soldier, that you don't have real experience." "Sergeant Cole doesn't know my service record," Grace said evenly. "But is it true?" Grace sighed. "Private Chen, does my instruction help you shoot better?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then does it matter where I learned it?" Chen thought about it. "I guess not. Focus on the skills, not the person teaching them." But Grace knew the damage was being done. Cole's constant undermining was eroding her authority. If she didn't address it soon, she'd lose the ability to teach effectively. That afternoon, Mark Foster pulled her aside after class. "Grace, you need to file a complaint about Cole. His behavior is creating a hostile work environment." "I can handle it." "I know you can, but you shouldn't have to. He's out of line." "Filing a complaint will just make it worse. He'll claim I can't take criticism, that I'm too sensitive. It'll confirm everything he thinks about women." "So what? Let him think what he wants. You have rights." Grace shook her head. "I've fought bigger battles than Sergeant Cole. This one isn't worth it." But that night, lying in bed, Grace wondered if she was making a mistake. Was her silence strength or weakness? Was she being patient or just letting herself be disrespected? She didn't sleep well. The marksmanship competition was now 1 week away. Cole trained constantly, and he made sure everyone knew it. He posted photos on social media. He talked about his strategy. He predicted his victory. Grace continued teaching, trying to ignore the circus Cole had created around himself. Then 3 days before the competition, something changed. Grace was in the instructor's office when the base commander, Colonel James Peterson, walked in with another officer she didn't recognize. "Ms. Bennett, do you have a moment?" Colonel Peterson asked. "Of course, sir." "This is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez from Special Operations Command. She'd like to speak with you." Martinez stepped forward, her expression serious. "Ms. Bennett, I apologize for the unexpected visit. I'm here because we have a situation that requires someone with very specific skills. Your name came up during our search." Grace's stomach tightened. "I'm just an instructor, Colonel." "We both know that's not entirely true," Martinez said gently. "I've reviewed your full service record, all of it." Grace glanced at Colonel Peterson, who looked surprised. He clearly didn't know about Grace's background either. "What kind of situation?" Grace asked carefully. "Can we speak privately?" They moved to a secure conference room. Martinez pulled out a classified file. "2 days ago, we received intelligence about a potential threat to a high-value diplomatic meeting taking place at Fort Moore in Alabama next week. We have reason to believe a hostile actor may attempt an assassination. We need counter-sniper assets in place." "You have plenty of qualified snipers in the military," Grace said. "We do, but this situation requires someone with extensive experience, perfect judgment, and the ability to make an impossible shot if necessary. Your record suggests you're one of maybe 5 people in the country with that combination of skills." Grace felt her past rising up to meet her present. "I'm retired." "I know, and I wouldn't ask if this wasn't critical. We need the best. According to your record, that's you." "What does this have to do with Fort Benning?" "The meeting is in 4 days. We need to assemble our team immediately, and you're here. We'd like to bring you on as a civilian contractor for this specific mission. 1 week, excellent pay, and you'd be saving lives." Grace was quiet for a long moment. She'd walked away from this life. She'd promised herself she was done with combat, done with the weight of life-and-death decisions. But she'd also sworn an oath to protect her country, and some oaths didn't expire. "I need time to think," Grace said. "You have until tomorrow morning," Martinez said. "I'm sorry to pressure you, but that's all the time we have." After they left, Grace sat alone in the conference room, her head in her hands. She'd successfully avoided this moment for 10 years. Now it had found her anyway. That evening, she called Michelle. "Mom, that's huge. Are you going to do it?" "I don't know. I left that world for good reasons." "But they need you, and you're still capable, right?" "Physically, yes, but mentally, I don't know if I want to carry that weight again." "Mom, I know the missions were hard. I know you saw terrible things, but you also saved lives. That matters." After the call, Grace walked to her closet and pulled out a case she hadn't opened in a decade. Inside was her old sniper rifle, meticulously maintained despite years of disuse. She assembled it, feeling the familiar weight, the balance she knew like her own heartbeat. She went to her basement, where she'd set up a small range years ago. She loaded a single round and fired at a target 25 yards away. Perfect center. Her hands were steady, her eye was sharp, her breath control was automatic. Physically, she could still do it. The question was whether she should. Grace slept on it. In the morning, she called Lieutenant Colonel Martinez. "I'll do it under one condition." "Name it." "After this mission, my full service record remains sealed. I don't want recognition or publicity. I just want to go back to being an instructor." "Agreed. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. You're saving lives." "I hope so." Grace spent the next 2 days in classified briefings, learning about the threat, the location, the protection plan. She'd be part of a 5-person counter-sniper team positioned around the meeting location to watch for threats. She told Colonel Peterson she needed a few days of personal leave for family matters. He approved without question. She didn't tell anyone else where she was going or why. But on the day before she left for Fort Moore, she had one final class to teach at Fort Benning, and Sergeant Cole was there, as cocky as ever. "Heard you're taking some time off, Ms. Bennett," Cole said. "Guess the job's too much for you." "Just personal business, Sergeant." "Well, you'll miss my big win at the competition tomorrow, probably for the best. Wouldn't want you to feel bad about not being able to compete." Grace looked at him steadily. "Good luck, Sergeant Cole." "Don't need luck, ma'am. I've got skill." Grace almost smiled. "Skill is important, but so is humility. You might want to work on that." "I'll be humble after I win," Cole said with a grin. After class, Private Chen approached Grace privately. "Ms. Bennett, I hope everything's okay with your family." "It will be, thank you, Chen." "Can I ask you something? Sergeant Cole keeps saying you've never been in real combat, but I looked you up online. I couldn't find any information about your service at all. Like nothing. Most instructors have at least some public record." Grace was quiet. "That made me think," Chen continued, "that maybe your record is classified, that maybe there's a reason we can't find anything about you. Am I right?" Grace looked at the young soldier. "Private Chen, what matters is whether you're learning to be a better marksman. Are you?" "Yes, ma'am, you're the best instructor I've had." "Then that's all that matters." Chen nodded slowly. "When you come back, maybe you could teach us about whatever it is you're not talking about." "Maybe," Grace said, "someday." That night, Grace packed for the mission. She laid out her gear with practiced efficiency: rifle, scope, ammunition, ghillie suit, range finder, weather instruments. Tools she'd used 1,000 times before. She looked at herself in the mirror. 62 years old, gray hair, reading glasses, she didn't look like a soldier anymore. But appearances could be deceiving. The next morning, Grace drove to Fort Moore, Alabama. She met with the counter-sniper team, 4 men in their 30s and 40s, all elite snipers with impressive records. When she walked into the briefing room, they all stared. "This is Grace Bennett," Lieutenant Colonel Martinez said. "She'll be taking Position Alpha." Position Alpha was the primary overwatch, the most critical location. The lead sniper always took that position. One of the men, a muscular guy in his 30s, spoke up. "With respect, Colonel, shouldn't one of us take Alpha? Ms. Bennett is a civilian contractor." "Ms. Bennett has more trigger time than all of you combined," Martinez said flatly. "She takes Alpha. Any other questions?" The room was silent. Over the next 2 days, Grace worked with the team to prepare. They set up positions around the meeting location, a secure conference building on base. They calculated sight lines, identified potential threat locations, and established communication protocols. The men on her team were professional, but she could feel their doubt. They were polite, but they didn't trust her. Not yet. On the morning of the diplomatic meeting, Grace took her position on a rooftop 600 yards from the conference building. She set up her rifle, tested the wind, and settled in to wait. The other snipers radioed in their positions. Bravo in position. Charlie in position. Delta in position. Echo in position. Grace keyed her radio, Alpha in position. The waiting began. 2 hours into the meeting, nothing had happened. Grace scanned the area methodically, watching for anything unusual. Movement, glint of glass, anything that might indicate a threat. Then she saw it, a window opening in a building 900 yards away, a position that shouldn't have access. "I have possible movement," Grace radioed. "Building 6, 4th floor, east window." "Confirm visual," Martinez asked from the command center. Grace adjusted her scope. Through the window, she could barely see a shape, dark clothing, something long. "I have a possible hostile with a long rifle, 900 yards. Alpha, are you certain?" Grace watched. The figure moved slightly, and she caught a glint of metal. "Confirmed, hostile sniper, building 6. The command center erupted in activity, but the hostile was moving into position, lining up a shot at the conference building. "Take the shot if you have it," Martinez ordered. "We're too far away to intercept in time." 900 yards, wind gusting at 12 miles per hour, elevated position, a target barely visible through a window. It was one of the hardest shots Grace had ever faced. And she had one bullet to get it right. The hostile sniper was settling into position. In seconds, he'd have his shot at the diplomats below. Grace controlled her breathing, calculated the wind, adjusted for elevation and distance. She thought about all the young soldiers who doubted her, about Sergeant Cole and his dismissive arrogance, about the assumption that age and gender meant incompetence. And then she stopped thinking about anything except the shot. Grace squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against Grace's shoulder with familiar force. Through her scope, she watched the bullet travel across 900 yards of space. It struck the hostile sniper in the shoulder just as he was settling behind his rifle. He spun backward, his weapon clattering to the floor. "Target hit," Grace reported calmly. "Hostile down." Within minutes, security teams stormed the building. They found the hostile sniper wounded but alive, along with enough evidence to confirm he'd been planning an assassination. The diplomatic meeting was evacuated, crisis averted. In the command center, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez stared at the after-action report in disbelief. 900 yards, through a partially obscured window, in gusting wind, one shot, one hit. "That's impossible," one of the male snipers said. "That's a 1 in 100 shot." "Not for her," Martinez said quietly. "Not for Grace Bennett." After the immediate crisis was handled, Martinez pulled Grace's full service record and showed it to the team. Grace Ann Bennett, 26 years of service, 4 combat deployments, master sniper, over 200 confirmed kills, longest confirmed kill, 1,247 yards, instructor at the elite sniper school for 12 years, multiple medals including 2 silver stars and a bronze star with valor. The men on her team went silent, reading the record with growing awe. "Why isn't this public?" one of them asked. "Why is she teaching basic marksmanship at Fort Benning instead of running advanced sniper programs?" "Because she chose privacy over recognition," Martinez said. "And we're going to respect that choice. This record stays classified, understood?" "Yes, ma'am." Grace was debriefed, thanked, and paid. She drove back to Fort Benning that night, arriving home exhausted but satisfied. The mission was complete. The threat was eliminated. She could return to her quiet life. But when she arrived at Fort Benning the next morning, everything had changed. Word had spread, not about the classified mission, but about something else. The marksmanship competition had taken place while she was gone. Sergeant Cole had competed, and he'd lost. Badly. Grace walked into the range to find a group of soldiers gathered around a posting board. The competition results were listed. Cole had finished 7th out of 12 competitors. "What happened?" Grace asked Mark Foster. Mark grinned. The competition included a long-range challenge at 800 yards in heavy wind. Cole couldn't adjust properly. He was so confident, and then he just couldn't make the shots. It was humbling to watch. Grace felt a small satisfaction, though she tried to suppress it. Who won? First Sergeant Williams from the Ranger Battalion made some incredible shots. You would have been proud. That afternoon, Grace's class assembled for the first time since she'd left. Cole was there, notably quieter than usual. His swagger had diminished. Good afternoon, Grace said. I hope you all learned something from the competition. Private Chen raised his hand. Ms. Bennett, Sergeant Cole said you were gone for family reasons. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, thank you for asking. Cole remained silent, staring at the ground. Grace began her instruction, teaching the same principles she'd taught for years. But this time, something was different. Cole was actually paying attention. After class, he approached her. Ms. Bennett, can I talk to you? Of course, Sergeant. Cole looked uncomfortable. I wanted to apologize for my attitude. The way I treated you, I was wrong. What changed? Grace asked, though she suspected she knew. The competition. I thought I was good. I thought I knew everything. And then I got out there on the long-range course and realized I don't know nearly as much as I thought I did. He paused. The things you've been teaching, wind reading, elevation adjustment, breath control, I didn't take them seriously. I thought they were just basic theory. But when I needed them under pressure, I couldn't apply them because I never really learned them. Recognizing that is the first step to improvement, Grace said. I know I've been disrespectful. I made assumptions about you based on your age and gender. That was wrong. I'm sorry. Grace nodded. Apology accepted, Sergeant Cole. Can I ask you something? Where did you learn to shoot? I mean, you must have real training to teach this well. I learned the same way you're learning. Practice, instruction, humility. Cole nodded. Would you be willing to give me extra instruction, help me improve? If you're willing to actually listen this time. I am, I promise. Over the next week, Grace worked with Cole individually, helping him understand the principles he'd dismissed. He proved to be a better student when he set aside his ego. Other soldiers noticed the change in Cole's attitude. The jokes about Grace stopped. The whispered mockery disappeared. In its place came genuine respect. But Grace knew the real test was still coming. 2 weeks after the Fort Moore mission, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez arrived at Fort Benning unannounced. She requested a meeting with Grace, Colonel Peterson, and Mark Foster. In Peterson's office, Martinez dropped a bombshell. The hostile sniper Grace neutralized has been talking. He was part of a larger plot. We've arrested 3 more conspirators, and we've prevented what would have been a devastating terrorist attack. Grace's shot saved at least 12 lives, possibly more. Colonel Peterson looked at Grace in shock. What is she talking about? Martinez pulled out the mission report. 10 days ago, Grace participated in a classified counter-sniper operation at Fort Moore. She made a 900-yard shot under extremely difficult conditions, neutralizing a hostile sniper who was about to assassinate multiple diplomats. Peterson read the report, his eyes widening. Then he looked at Grace. You did this? Yes, sir. But you told me you were taking personal leave for family matters. The mission was classified, sir. I couldn't discuss it. Peterson turned to Martinez. Why wasn't I informed that one of my instructors was being pulled for a classified mission? Because Grace's involvement was classified, Martinez said. And frankly, because we didn't think you knew about her background. What background? Martinez slid Grace's full-service record across the desk. Peterson read it in silence, his expression cycling through shock, amazement, and something like embarrassment. You're one of the most decorated snipers in military history, he said finally. And you've been working here as a basic marksmanship instructor for 5 years. Yes, sir. Why? Grace chose her words carefully. Because I wanted to serve without the weight of my past. I wanted to teach without people treating me differently because of what I'd done. I wanted to be judged on my current competence, not my old reputation. But you're overqualified for this position. You should be running programs, developing curriculum, training elite forces. I'm happy where I am, sir. Peterson shook his head. This is extraordinary. Does anyone else know about this? Just the people in this room, Martinez said. And it needs to stay that way. Grace has requested that her full record remain classified. Even after what she just did. Especially after what she just did, She doesn't want recognition, she just wants to teach. Peterson looked at Grace with new eyes. Well, at least let me say thank you for your service, all of it. You're welcome, sir. But word had a way of spreading, even when it was supposed to be classified. 3 days later, Grace was teaching her morning class when Sergeant Cole asked a question. Ms. Bennett, hypothetically speaking, what's the longest shot you've ever made? Grace looked at him carefully. That's an oddly specific question, Sergeant. Just curious. I mean, you must have some experience to teach us about long-range shooting. I have some experience, yes. How much is some? Grace could see where this was going. Somehow, some version of the story had leaked. Not the classified details, but enough to make people curious. Enough to teach you what you need to know, she said. But Private Chen spoke up. Ms. Bennett, there's a rumor going around. People are saying you were involved in some kind of operation recently, that you made an impossible shot and saved lives. Where did you hear that? Grace asked. It's all over the base. Nobody knows the details, but everyone's talking about a civilian instructor who did something extraordinary. Grace sighed, so much for staying anonymous. The specifics are classified, she said carefully. But yes, I was asked to assist with a security matter. I did my job, that's all. Was it really a 900-yard shot? Cole asked. I can't discuss the details. But it was something like that. Grace was silent. The class erupted in whispers. 900 yards was legendary distance. Making that shot under pressure was something most of them would never accomplish. Mark Foster appeared at the door. Grace, you're needed in Colonel Peterson's office, now. Grace walked to the headquarters building, wondering what new complication had emerged. But when she entered Peterson's office, she found not just the colonel, but also Sergeant Cole, Private Chen, and a dozen other soldiers from her classes. Ms. Bennett, Peterson said formally, these soldiers have requested to speak with you. I've given them permission. Cole stepped forward. Ms. Bennett, we owe you an apology, all of us. We've been learning from one of the greatest snipers in military history, and we treated you like you were just some civilian instructor who didn't know what she was talking about. How did you? The rumor about the 900-yard shot got people curious, Chen explained. Some of us started digging. We couldn't find your full record, it's sealed. But we found references, mentions in other people's after-action reports, awards ceremonies, training records, enough to piece together that you're not just an instructor, you're a legend. Grace felt her privacy crumbling. This was exactly what she'd wanted to avoid. I'm just a teacher, she said quietly. No, ma'am, Cole said firmly. You're a master teaching students who didn't even know they were in the presence of mastery, and that's our fault. We should have respected your instruction regardless of who you were. But knowing now what you've accomplished makes our disrespect even worse. The other soldiers nodded in agreement. We want to learn from you, Chen said. Really learn, not just the basics, but everything you know. You have knowledge that could save our lives in combat. Please teach us. Grace looked at their earnest faces. These young soldiers who dismissed her a month ago were now begging for her expertise. Colonel Peterson spoke. Ms. Bennett, I'm creating a new position, Advanced Sniper Instructor. It comes with a significant pay increase and the authority to develop your own curriculum. You'd teach a smaller group of students, the ones headed for specialized roles. You'd have complete autonomy over how you structure the training. Sir, I appreciate the offer, but... Before you decline, consider this. These soldiers need what you know, not just the shooting techniques, but the judgment, the decision-making under pressure, the mental discipline. You have 26 years of knowledge that's too valuable to keep hidden. Grace was quiet, thinking. I don't want publicity, she said finally. No media, no interviews, no making me into some kind of symbol. Agreed, Peterson said. This stays within the base, but let us use your expertise to train the next generation properly. Grace looked at the soldiers, at Cole, who'd learned humility, at Chen, who'd never stopped trying to learn, at all of them young and eager and heading into a dangerous world. Okay, she said, I'll do it. The soldiers broke into smiles and applause. But, Grace added, you're going to work harder than you've ever worked. I don't train soldiers, I train snipers, and that means excellence in every single detail. No shortcuts, no ego, no excuses, understood. Yes, ma'am, they chorused. Grace smiled slightly. Then let's get started. The new advanced sniper program began 2 weeks later. Grace had 12 students, all carefully selected from infantry units headed for specialized assignments. Sergeant Cole was among them, as was Private Chen. On the first day, Grace laid out the reality. Sniping isn't about making impossible shots, she told them. It's about discipline, patience, judgment. The shot itself is the easy part. Everything before it, the preparation, the positioning, the calculations, the waiting, that's what separates competent shooters from true snipers. She took them through a training regimen that was far more demanding than anything they'd experienced. Hours lying motionless in uncomfortable positions. Endless practice calculating wind and elevation. Studying ballistics, weather patterns, and fieldcraft. Why do we need to know about plants and soil? One soldier complained after Grace made them identify different types of vegetation. Because in combat, you're going to build a hide using local materials. If you choose the wrong plants, you'll stand out. If you disturb the soil wrong, you'll leave evidence. Sniping isn't just shooting, it's becoming invisible. They learned quickly that Grace's standards were uncompromising. She caught every error, no matter how small. A scope adjustment slightly off. A breathing pattern not quite controlled. A position that would be sustainable for an hour but not for 6. In combat, Grace told them, there's no such thing as good enough. There's perfect and there's failure. I'm teaching you perfect. 3 weeks into the program, Grace took them to a remote training area for a field exercise. Each student had to construct a hide, remain concealed for 8 hours, and take a shot at a target when signaled. Grace walked the area with Mark Foster, trying to spot the hidden students. I can't find half of them, Mark admitted. Your training is working. Grace smiled. They're learning. She stopped near a small cluster of brush. Private Chen, your right boot is visible. Adjust your position. A voice came from the brush. How did you know I was here, ma'am? The vegetation pattern is slightly too perfect. Nature is messy. You arranged your cover too neatly. Chen adjusted, and the boot disappeared. After 8 hours, Grace signaled for the shots. All 12 students hit their targets, some closer to center than others, but all effective. Well done, Grace said as they emerged from their hides. You're starting to understand. Sergeant Cole approached her after the exercise. Ma'am, can I ask you about something? Of course. The Fort Moore shot, 900 yards. How did you make that decision? I mean, one shot, massive consequences if you miss. How did you know you could make it? Grace was quiet for a moment. I didn't know, not with certainty, but I knew my training, I knew my capabilities, and I knew that not taking the shot meant people would die, so I trusted my preparation and took the shot. Weren't you scared? Terrified, Grace admitted, but fear doesn't make the shot, training does. How do you live with that pressure? By accepting it. When you become a sniper, you accept that you'll be asked to make impossible decisions in impossible situations. You prepare as best you can, and then you trust yourself. Cole nodded slowly. I used to think sniping was about being the best shot. Now I realize it's about being the most reliable person in the most critical moment. Now you're learning. 2 months into the program, the students were scheduled for their final evaluation. A complex scenario involving multiple targets, time pressure, and difficult conditions. But the day before the evaluation, Grace received a call from Lieutenant Colonel Martinez. Grace, I have a problem, and I need your help. What kind of problem? The hostile sniper from Fort Moore, remember him? Of course. He's part of a larger network. We've been tracking them. One of the members has surfaced in Tennessee near Fort Campbell. We have reason to believe he's planning another attack. Grace's stomach tightened. You want me to help again? I want you to lead the counter-sniper team again. You're the best we have. I'm teaching now. I have students. I know, but Grace, this threat is credible. We need you. Grace thought about her students, about the evaluation they'd been preparing for, about the program she was building. But she also thought about her oath, about lives at stake. When, she asked. Tomorrow. I know it's short notice. Grace made a decision. I'll do it on one condition. What? My students come with me. As observers, they're ready for this kind of experience. Martinez hesitated. That's unusual. They're going to face situations like this in their careers. Let them see how it's really done, from a safe distance as observers only. Okay, bring them. Grace gathered her 12 students that evening and explained the situation. They would travel to Fort Campbell in Tennessee. They would observe a real counter-sniper operation. They would not participate, but they would learn. This is real, Grace told them. Not a training exercise, lives are at stake. You'll see how everything you've learned applies under actual pressure. Understood? Yes, ma'am. They drove through the night to Fort Campbell. At the command center, Grace met with Martinez and reviewed the intelligence. A hostile operative had been spotted near a military ceremony scheduled for the next day. Several high-ranking officers would be present. The threat assessment suggested a possible sniper attack. Grace studied the location, an outdoor parade ground surrounded by buildings. Multiple sight lines, difficult to secure. I'll take the primary overwatch position, Grace said. But I want 2 of my students as spotters. They need to see how this works. Martinez agreed. Grace selected Sergeant Cole and Private Chen. You'll be with me in position, Grace told them. You'll observe and assist. You don't take any action without my direct order. Clear? Yes, ma'am. The next morning, Grace positioned herself on a rooftop overlooking the parade ground. Cole and Chen were beside her, both tense with the reality of the situation. Breathe, Grace told them. Stay calm, just like training. The ceremony began below. Hundreds of soldiers in formation, officers on a reviewing stand, families in attendance. Grace scanned the surrounding buildings methodically. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Then movement, a window opening in a building 700 yards away. I have possible contact, Grace said into her radio. Building 12, 3rd floor, south window. Can you confirm hostile? Martinez asked from the command center. Grace watched. A figure appeared, dark clothing, something metallic. Chen, Grace said, use your spotter scope, tell me what you see. Chen, despite his nervousness, focused his scope on the window. I see a male subject, dark clothes, possibly holding a long object. Can't confirm weapon. Good, Cole, wind reading. Cole checked his instruments. Wind from the southeast, gusting between 8 and 10 miles per hour. Correct, now watch. The figure in the window moved slightly, and Grace caught the unmistakable shape of a rifle barrel. Confirmed hostile, she said. I have a shot. Take it when ready, Martinez confirmed. Grace settled behind her rifle. 700 yards, moderate wind, elevated position, a clean shot, but only if she did everything perfectly. Watch my breathing, she told her students. Watch my trigger control, this is what all the training is for. She inhaled slowly, exhaled halfway and held. She made microscopic adjustments for wind and distance. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked. Through her scope, Grace watched the bullet travel across 700 yards. It struck the hostile's rifle, knocking it from his hands a split second before he could fire. Target neutralized, Grace reported. Weapon disabled. Security teams stormed the building. Within minutes, they had the hostile in custody. Cole and Chen stared at Grace in awe. You shot his rifle, Cole breathed. Not him, his rifle. Whenever possible, you disable the threat without killing, Grace said. That's the judgment part. I could have killed him, but disabling his weapon was sufficient. That's an impossible shot, Chen said. No, Grace corrected. It's a difficult shot that becomes possible through training and practice, which is why we train. The debriefing took hours. The hostile was interrogated and provided information that led to the arrest of 3 more conspirators. Another attack prevented. On the drive back to Fort Benning, Grace's students were quiet, processing what they'd witnessed. Finally, Cole spoke. Ma'am, I understand now why you didn't tell us about your background. You wanted us to focus on the skills, not the legend. That's right. But watching you work today, that showed us what we're working toward. Not just making shots, but making the right decisions. Having the judgment to know when to shoot and when not to shoot, when to disable and when to eliminate. That's the real skill, Grace agreed. Any competent marksman can hit a target at 700 yards with enough practice, but knowing which target and how to engage it and what the consequences will be, that's what makes a sniper. Chen said quietly, I used to think you were too old for this job. I'm sorry. Age gave you something none of us have yet, experience and wisdom. Grace smiled. Age gives you perspective. It teaches you that heroics aren't about showing off. They're about doing what's necessary as efficiently as possible with the minimum force required. Back at Fort Benning, the students completed their final evaluation with a new understanding. They'd seen the real thing. Now they knew what they were training for. All 12 passed with excellence. At the graduation ceremony for the Advanced Sniper Program, Colonel Peterson spoke to the assembled soldiers and instructors. This program represents a new standard for sniper training at Fort Benning. Under the leadership of Grace Bennett, we're producing snipers who are not just technically proficient, but who understand the full weight of their responsibility. He looked at Grace. Ms. Bennett has asked me not to detail her service record publicly, and I'll honor that. But I will say this, you students have learned from someone who has walked every path you're about to walk, who has faced every challenge you'll face, who has made the hard choices and lived with the consequences. Listen to her, learn from her, and carry forward the standards she set. After the ceremony, Grace was approached by a general she didn't recognize. Ms. Bennett, I'm General Robert Thornton, Commanding General of the Infantry School. I've been reviewing the results of your program. I'd like to expand it. Make it the model for advanced sniper training across the Army. Sir, I'm just one instructor. Then we'll get you help. We'll build a team around you. But your methods, your standards, we need that throughout the service. Grace thought about it. A year ago, she'd wanted nothing more than to be invisible, to teach quietly and avoid attention. But she'd learned something over the past months. Her experience was too valuable to hoard. The young soldiers heading into combat deserved every advantage she could give them. Okay, she said, but I do it my way, no compromises on standards. Agreed. Over the next year, Grace built a comprehensive sniper training program at Fort Benning. She recruited former snipers as instructors. She developed curriculum that emphasized not just shooting but judgment, ethics, and psychological resilience. Sergeant Cole became one of her assistant instructors, having proven both his shooting ability and his capacity for growth. Private Chen completed the program and was assigned to an elite ranger unit, where he distinguished himself in combat. And Grace found that teaching at this level, sharing everything she knew with students who truly wanted to learn, was more fulfilling than she'd imagined. She still lived quietly in her small house with her garden. She still avoided publicity. Her full service record remained classified. But within the military community, word spread. The best sniper training in the Army was at Fort Benning, and it was run by a 62-year-old woman who could make shots that seemed impossible. Students came from across the military to train with her. They arrived cocky and confident. They left humbled and competent. 3 years after the Fort Moore mission, Grace stood at the advanced range, watching a new class of students. They were practicing long-range shots in challenging conditions. A young female soldier approached. Ms. Bennett, I wanted to thank you. I almost didn't apply for this program. I thought, as a woman, I'd never be taken seriously as a sniper. But hearing about you, about what you've accomplished, gave me courage. Grace smiled. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you graduate. And then go out there and be so good that the next generation of female snipers has even more examples to look up to. Yes, ma'am, I will. That evening, Grace received a call from Michelle. How's the legendary sniper instructor doing? Michelle teased. I'm not legendary, I'm just teaching. Mom, I saw an article about Fort Benning having the best sniper training in the military. They didn't mention you by name, but I know it's your program. It's not about me, it's about the students. It's about both. You're doing important work. After the call, Grace sat in her living room looking at the photographs on the mantel. The young woman in uniform, the medals, the accomplishments. She used to look at those photos and feel only loss, the weight of what she'd seen, the cost of what she'd done. But now she looked at them and felt something different. Continuity, her past informing her present, the skills she'd learned being passed on to a new generation. The sergeant had doubted the old sniper, until one bullet proved him wrong. But the real proof wasn't just that one shot at Fort Moore, or the shot at Fort Campbell, or any single demonstration of skill. The real proof was in the hundreds of students she'd trained, the lives they would save, the judgment they would exercise, the standards they would uphold. Grace Bennett had been one of the greatest snipers in military history. Now, she was ensuring that the next generation would be even better. Not because she sought recognition, but because service didn't end when you took off the uniform. It continued in every lesson taught, every standard upheld, every young soldier who learned that age, gender, and appearance didn't define capability. Only competence, dedication, and integrity did. And those lessons would echo through every sniper who trained at Fort Benning for generations to come. The doubt had been answered, not just by one bullet, but by a lifetime of service, continuing long after most people would have retired. Grace Bennett had found her purpose again, and it was exactly where she needed to be.